Hello everyone, and welcome to my channel, Cooking for the Family. I'm Dyvonne, and today I'm going to share with you my recipe for Crockpot beef stew. It comes out so good. It is a no-fuss recipe with tender vegetables and how I make my wonderful rich broth to go with this beef stew, and we're going to do it all in our Crockpot. Are you ready? Let's get started. Now first I'm going to get together my vegetables. So if you'd like to take notes and follow along with me as I make dinner for the family tonight, definitely go ahead and do that. But in the description box below for your reference, I'm going to have a list of ingredients for you and share those as well at the end of this video. So in my crock pot, I have my little potatoes that I put in. That was 1.5 pounds of my little potatoes, and a half a bag of the baby carrots, and also my celery, and that was 2 celery ribs. So far in my crock pot, I have my 1.5 pounds of small potatoes. I have a half of a bag, and the bag of my baby carrots was the 16-ounce bag, so half a bag was 8 ounces, so I have half a bag of those, and then my 2 celery ribs that was cut up, so those are in there. Now my onion I'm using is a yellow onion, but you can use a white onion or a brown onion depending on what you have at home available, and I'm using about 1/3 of this onion. So I've cut my onion up into chunky pieces about this size, about say maybe 1/4 or so. I like to kind of see the onion when they're in the stew. And so I went on and I cut up that 1/3 of a yellow onion. Now next I'm going to put in a bay leaf. Actually this is kind of small, this bay leaf, so I'm going to end up putting 2 bay leaves total to my crock pot. Now this is something that I love to use as well. This is the onion mushroom recipe secrets by Lipton. I use 1 pack of that. So just 1 pack. I'm going to be using this. It's going to give it good flavor. And something else is that when I use this, I don't put any additional seasoning, so it makes it really simple. It's just this and 1 other ingredient that we're going to also be using, okay? And that's going to be this beef broth. So I'm going to use 1 can of the beef broth. It's the condensed version of the beef broth, and that's the 10.5 ounce can, okay? So next here, I'm going to put in 2 pounds of beef stew meat. This is chuck meat that's been diced and it's been cut up. You can trim any additional trimmings if you want to. I didn't. I just left it for just some extra flavor in there. But this is 2 pounds that I have. Now I'm also going to put in some black pepper, and that's optional, but I like to put in a little black pepper, and so I'm just going to sprinkle some black pepper onto the meat, and this is about 1/4 of a teaspoon I put on, not too much. And now for the beef broth, and then the beef broth comes different ways, so you can get the one that you like or you prefer. I'm using this one by Campbell's, and it's the condensed one, and it's just a regular condensed one. And then I'm going to add a can of water. So that was the can of beef broth, and then I added in also 1 can of water. Now once I add in the beef broth and the 1 can of water, I like to mix everything around, kind of taking the vegetables from the top to the bottom, mixing in the soup mix that's in there and also the soup. Now initially it may look like there's not enough liquid, but as your stew starts to cook, the beef will start to release their juices, and you're going to end up having plenty of broth that's going to be created from the meat and the vegetables cooking, because we don't want to put too much liquid, because then it's going to more so boil, and we want it to simmer more so than boil and have way too much liquid in there. And so I added in that bay leaf, and I did add in a second one because that one was kind of small. Now if your bay leaf is more on the large size, then I'd say if it's more than 3 inches, then you're just going to need just 1 bay leaf. So once I do that, I'm going to put the top of my crock pot, and I'm going to set it on high, and on high at 7 hours it's going, and it'll cook anywhere from about 6 hours to about 7 hours. And you can also set it on low and cook it for anywhere from about 8 to 9 hours, 10, depending on your crock pot, because crock pots vary. So far our stew has been cooking in our crock pot. We still have about 4 hours and 47 minutes left. But this is what it's looking like a little more than 2 hours and about 15-20 minutes in. And you see how much more liquid is now in my crock pot. And all it was just letting it go ahead and start to cook on the high. And just that one can plus the can of water, and we already have plenty of liquid. Now the secret to having nice tender stew meat for your stew is letting it cook not just until it's done, because even though your stew meat will be done before 7 minutes, letting it cook continuously, what it's going to do, and make sure it's down in that broth nice and good, that is going to tender up your meat. So sometimes, especially when I was newly married and I was making stews and my meat was always just tough, and my sister and my mom, they had some, and my mom told me, she said, you need to let this cook longer. And I was like, but it was done. She's like, no, you need to let it cook longer. And so that's something that I learned from my mother, was that although the meat is done, especially sometimes with tougher pieces of meat, letting it continue to simmer and cook, that is actually what makes it nice and tender. So again, your meat will be done, but that extra cooking time of letting the meat continue to cook is what tenders it up. Now we are at 6 hours in, and I'm checking on my stew. It is looking good. I'm going to go ahead and look for my bay leaves and fish those out, because as I'm moving around my vegetables and my meat, I can tell it is nice and it is tender. My meat is starting to even fall apart a little bit, and so that is nice. My bay leaves have done their job. I took one out, and then here's the second one. I'm going to take that one out. And I'm going to share with you and show you my method of thickening up my soups and my stews. But first, let's go ahead and you see I put my fork into one of my potatoes. And these potatoes are about the size of, say, like a golf ball. These are potatoes that I'm using, around about that size. And you see how nice and tender our meat is? It is just nice and tender, no tough meat. We'll be able to eat this with no problem. And so that is a win right there. And now when it comes to our wonderful broth that we have here, you can leave it just like that if you want your broth like this. But if you want to thicken it a little bit, I'm going to share with you how I thicken it up. And I use this method whether I'm using my crock pot or either my stovetop cooking, either one. In my bowl, I have 2 tablespoons of soft butter, and I'm using unsalted butter, but if you only have salted butter on hand, that's fine. But 2 tablespoons of butter, that's soft, and 2 tablespoons of flour. I'm using the back of my spoon to mash the butter and the flour together. So that's why you want your butter to be nice and soft. We're going to mix this together, and we're going to create like a paste, a little butter paste. And so see how I'm mixing this together? It's going to be nice and creamy. This is what you want, nice and creamy. And when it's nice and creamy like this, I'm going to do about half a tablespoon or so at a time, teaspoon and half a tablespoon. And I'm going to mix in this mixture right into the crock pot. Now by doing this, my crock pot's still on, high, and I still have about an hour left or so of cooking time on my timer. I mix this in, and then I'm going to take my big spoon and just, mix everything around, because you want to make sure that you dissolve that butter flour mixture right into the broth. This is going to thicken up my broth, but you want to also, once you do this, you want to let it stay in the crock pot on high and cook, or on low if you're using the low setting. Let it go ahead and cook for at least an additional 15 minutes or so, 15 to 20 minutes. So usually I do around about 15 minutes, because we want to cook off that raw flour taste. And so that's going to take a good 15 minutes just to go ahead, and continue to simmer and to cook. So I'd like to do this a little at a time, because then I can control how thick I want it. So, and you can control how thick you want it by how much of that flour and butter mixture that you put in. And as it continues to simmer and your crock pot is still on, it'll continue to thicken up for you. And so this is going to create that nice rich broth that's going to be for our stew. And you see, it's already becoming nice and thick, and the color has changed just slightly. That is what we're looking for. And so I'm going to add the balance here of my butter and my flour mixture. And again, that was 2 tablespoons of nice soft butter and 2 tablespoons of flour. equal parts 2 and 2, and we're going to add it directly to the crock pot. I also do this on the stove top if I have like a soup or a stew that I want to thicken up a little bit. And I like using this versus using the cornstarch because that butter also adds flavor to my dish, and I just like how it thickens better than using cornstarch, which I can find sometimes the cornstarch will make it kind of glossy, and sometimes depending, cornstarch can clump up on it, just depends. And so I like using the butter flour method, and something that I learned to do from my mom. So now it's been about 15 minutes, and this is what our wonderful beef stew is looking like. Our broth has thickened up slightly. And what's nice is that if you don't want to serve this with potatoes, you can leave the potatoes out, do the other vegetables, leave the potatoes out, and you can serve this over rice if you like. You could serve it over egg noodles, is really good. A side of crusty bread, or even some cornbread. Some cornbread muffins really is nice. And then as a finishing touch, I have some nice fresh flat leaf parsley that I just sprinkle on top, and that's optional. But since I grow it in my garden, I always like to finish dishes off with a little bit of nice fresh parsley. So this is our beef stew in the crock pot. We made it. It's a little less than 7 hours. It is all done. And this is plenty for about 6 to 8 people, round about there. And anytime that we end up having leftovers, they make great leftovers. And then if I have a couple portions left after that, I usually put it in my container and just freeze it. And that'll usually give maybe like 1 or 2 more servings. And so it's a quick meal for someone on the go. Now, if you want to make this meal just for a couple of people, you can cut the recipe in half, with the exception, of course, of the seasoning packet and the can of beef broth. You want to still use that measurement for the recipe, and you would just go ahead and double up on the butter flour mixture to thicken it up to your liking. Well, this bite's for you. Go ahead and take your bite. Now I'm going to take my bite and see how we did today. It's a little hot. Got to blow it up. Oh my goodness, this stew right here. This stew, y'all have got to give this a try. It is really simple to put together. You put in the crock pot and you go. The broth is nice and rich. The vegetables have come out perfectly. The beef is nice and tender. I hope you give this recipe a try. I will put that information in the description box below, the list of ingredients, my other crock pot recipes, and family dinners. And for a visual, these are the ingredients that I use. This was my 2 pounds of my beef stew meat, my 1.5 pounds of my potatoes. This is the bag of baby carrots. I just used a half of that bag. My condensed beef broth, my onion, my celery, and that 1 packet of the onion mushroom soup. And of course, a couple of bay leaves. Well, that is it for me today. I hope you enjoyed spending time with me in my kitchen as I made dinner for my family. If you're not subscribed, please hit that subscribe button. If you like this video, don't forget to show it some love. Give it a thumbs up and click share. Share this video with a friend or family. And remember, it's always good when Dyvonne is cooking for the family. I'll see you on the next one. Bye-bye, everybody.